Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It all began with a quiet morning in Genoa City, but as fans of the young and the restless know too well, peace never lasts long there. The air was thick with tension at Newman Enterprises, where Victoria Newman sat behind her sleek desk, reviewing a set of confidential documents she had requested personally. The file had arrived earlier than expected, delivered by a courier who seemed unusually nervous. She didn't think much of it at the time, but as her eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. The DNA results in her hands told a story that defied everything she believed to be true. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and she whispered to herself in disbelief, "This can't be real. This can't be right." The document claimed in clear and undeniable print that Audra Charles was her biological daughter, hers and Cole Howard's. Victoria's hands trembled as she set the papers down. Memories from decades ago came rushing back. Those blurry, painful years filled with heartbreak and secrecy. Her relationship with Cole had been one of the most complicated chapters of her life. They had shared love, loss, and confusion surrounding a child who at the time, she believed had not survived. Could it be possible that the child she mourned all those years ago had been alive all along, and that child was now the cunning, sharp-tongued Audra Charles who had inserted herself into the lives of so many in Genoa City? The thought felt impossible, yet the proof was right before her eyes. The more she read, the more undeniable it became. The DNA matched perfectly. Audra wasn't just some ambitious businesswoman, she was family. Meanwhile, across town, Audra had no idea that her entire world was about to implode. She had always prided herself on control over her image, her career, and the men she manipulated to get ahead. From Tucker McCall to Kyle Abbott, Audra had played her cards with precision, but nothing could prepare her for the storm that was brewing behind the polished doors of Newman Enterprises. As she prepared for her next corporate maneuver, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria Newman. Audra smirked. She assumed this was just another business call. Maybe Victoria wanted to negotiate, maybe she was offering another alliance. What Audra didn't know was that this call would change her life forever. When she arrived at Victoria's office, she immediately sensed something was off. Victoria wasn't her usual calm and composed self. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes burned with emotion. Cole Howard was also there, standing by the window, his face pale and tense. The air was suffocating. "What's this about?" Audra asked, crossing her arms, pretending to be in control. Victoria took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly as she said, "Audra, there's something you need to see." She handed her the DNA report. Audra glanced at it, her brow furrowing in confusion, and then she froze. Her mouth went dry as she read the words. "What is this supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice cracking despite her best effort to stay calm. Cole spoke softly. "It means you're our daughter." Audra laughed nervously, shaking her head. "No, that's ridiculous. Some kind of joke, right? Who set this up?" But Victoria didn't flinch. Her eyes glistened with tears. "It's not a joke, Audra. The test was done through independent verification not once but twice. The DNA doesn't lie." Audra's knees felt weak, and for the first time, the usually unshakable woman looked lost. Her mind spun back to her own fragmented childhood, the foster homes, the constant moving, the feeling that something was always missing. She had always wondered who her real parents were, but she had long ago buried that curiosity under ambition and cynicism. Now the truth was staring her in the face, and it was both miraculous and horrifying. Cole stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion and disbelief. "I don't even know how this happened," he said quietly. "Victoria and I were told our baby didn't survive. Someone lied to us, Audra. Someone stole you from us." The room fell silent, broken only by the sound of Audra's shaky breathing. "Stole me?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "Why would anyone do that?" Victoria clenched her fists, anger beginning to replace her shock. "I don't know. But whoever did this destroyed years of our lives." It was a moment that none of them could fully process. A lifetime of lies condensed into a single excruciating truth. News in Genoa City travels fast, and it didn't take long before whispers of the shocking DNA revelation began spreading. Nikki Newman was one of the first to find out, and she was utterly stunned. The thought that Audra, the woman who had schemed and seduced her way through the Newman family, could actually be family was almost too much to comprehend. When Nikki confronted Victoria, her emotions were conflicted. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also feared what this revelation might do to the Newman dynasty. "You have to be careful, Victoria," Nikki warned. "Audra isn't exactly known for her loyalty." Victoria sighed deeply. "I know, Mom, but she's my daughter. Whether I like it or not, that changes everything." Cole, on the other hand, was struggling with guilt. He blamed himself for not digging deeper all those years ago. "I should have questioned it," he told Victoria. "Something about how they handled the baby never sat right with me." Victoria tried to console him, but she too felt the weight of regret. Both of them had been robbed of their child, and now that she was standing right in front of them, alive, grown, and unrecognizable from the baby they once loved, they didn't know how to begin rebuilding that bond. Audra, meanwhile, was spiraling. Her identity, her carefully built persona, her confidence. Everything had been shattered in an instant. She avoided everyone for days, locking herself away in her apartment as she tried to make sense of the truth. She looked through old photos, documents, anything that might hint at the people who raised her, or rather the people who lied to her. If what Victoria and Cole said was true, then someone had taken her away and built her entire life on a foundation of deceit. It made her furious. She wanted answers and she wanted revenge. The situation only grew more complicated when Victor Newman got involved. The patriarch of the Newman family was livid when he heard the news. "You expect me to believe that woman, that manipulative schemer, is my granddaughter?" he roared. Victoria stood her ground. "It's the truth, Dad. I didn't want to believe it either, but the DNA is conclusive." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Then we find out who did this. Who took my granddaughter and lied to my family." He immediately ordered his people to investigate, determined to uncover who was behind the decades-long deception. When Victor Newman sets his sights on the truth, nothing stays buried for long. As days passed, new information surfaced, shocking details about an adoption cover-up that traced back to a mysterious doctor who had once worked for Newman Family Associates. It appeared that after Victoria gave birth, the baby had been taken under the pretense of complications. The doctor, desperate for money and working with a childless couple, orchestrated the illegal adoption. But somehow things didn't go as planned. The couple who took the baby later died in a car crash, and Audra was shuffled into the foster system under a new name. The truth was devastating, and it only made Victoria's heart ache more. She could hardly imagine the pain her daughter must have endured growing up without love or stability. Audra's reaction shifted from denial to rage. When she finally returned to Newman Enterprises, she demanded answers. "You're telling me I was stolen from you? That I lived my whole life thinking I was unwanted, when the truth was that you didn't even know I existed?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment the strong, calculating woman disappeared, replaced by a lost child searching for belonging. Victoria tried to reach her, stepping closer. "Audra, I can't change what happened, but I can promise you one thing. I never stopped loving the child I lost. I thought about her every day. And now that I know she's you, I'm not going to lose you again." Tears welled up in Audra's eyes, but she turned away. "You don't know me, Victoria. You don't know what I've had to do to survive. You think we can just pretend to be a family now?" Victoria's voice softened. "No, but we can start somewhere." The scene was raw, emotional, and deeply human. Two women bound by blood yet separated by time and tragedy, struggling to find their footing in a new reality neither had asked for. Cole stood back, watching the two most important women in his life face off. His emotions were torn between joy and grief. He wanted to protect Audra, to be the father she never had, but he also knew the kind of woman she had become. Her reputation in Genoa City wasn't spotless, and her alliances had often been self-serving. But he couldn't deny the pull of fatherly instinct. "Audra," he said gently, "you don't have to go through this alone anymore. We're here. Whatever you need." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. The revelation shook the entire town. Tucker McCall was one of the first outsiders to react, and his response was a mix of amusement and disbelief. "So the woman I've been working with is actually Victoria Newman's daughter?" he muttered. "Well, that explains a lot." Meanwhile, Nate Hastings, who had once shared romantic tension with Victoria, was stunned by the emotional toll this took on her. He tried to comfort her, but Victoria was too lost in the whirlwind of rediscovered motherhood and anger to let anyone in. As weeks passed, the story deepened. Victor's investigation uncovered that the conspiracy surrounding Audra's abduction was part of a much larger cover-up, tied to corporate espionage and old Newman enemies. Someone had wanted to hurt Victoria and Cole, and what better way than to take their child? The shocking possibility that someone within the Newman circle had been complicit made everyone uneasy. Victoria was determined to find the truth, not just for herself but for Audra, who deserved to know who stole her life. Audra's transformation began quietly. The cold ambition that once defined her started to melt as she began to confront her past. For the first time she allowed herself to feel, to mourn, to grieve, to hope. She visited the Newman ranch, where Victor greeted her with caution but also a glimmer of respect. "You're a Newman now," he told her sternly. "That name comes with power and responsibility. Don't waste it." Those words struck something deep within her. Over time, Audra started to rebuild her relationship with Victoria and Cole, though it wasn't easy. Trust had to be earned, not demanded. There were arguments, painful conversations, and moments of silence that spoke louder than words. But slowly, a fragile bond began to form. For Victoria, it was a second chance to be the mother she was denied the first time. For Audra, it was a chance to find something she never knew she needed: family. And yet, not everyone in Genoa City was ready to accept the new reality. Some saw Audra's connection to the Newmans as an opportunity for her to gain even more power, while others doubted her sincerity. But as Victoria often reminded them, blood doesn't lie. The truth had been exposed, and though it brought pain, it also brought healing. The revelation that Audra Charles was the long-lost daughter of Cole and Victoria Newman would forever change the dynamics of the young and the restless. Genoa City would never be the same again. The world, as it had been so carefully constructed and fiercely defended, did not shatter with a loud crash, but rather began to dissolve at the edges, the familiar contours of reality softening into a terrifying, unrecognizable blur. For Audra, the moment the words were spoken aloud, a simple clinical phrase like paternity confirmation or genetic match, was not a moment of clarity but one of profound and utter disorientation. It was as if the ground beneath her feet, the very foundation upon which she had built her identity, her ambitions, and her understanding of her own place in the universe, had turned to quicksand. This was not a piece of news. It was a seismic event that reached back through time and rewrote every significant moment of her life with a new, unsettling ink. The air itself seemed to grow thick, resistant to breath, and the sounds of the room, the hum of a computer, the distant ring of a phone, the murmur of voices, all receded into a dull, roaring silence that was entirely her own. This was shock, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a physical state of being, a system-wide failure in the face of an impossible truth. Her mind, usually so sharp, so strategic, a weapon she wielded with precision in the cutthroat world of corporate Genoa City, became a chaotic jumble of disconnected thoughts and sensory fragments. She could feel the cold weight of her own wedding ring against her finger, a symbol of a union that now felt like a lie, and see the almost imperceptible pattern in the grain of the mahogany desk, her focus narrowing to absurd trivialities as a defense against the overwhelming enormity of the revelation. The initial visceral numbness began to recede, making way for a torrent of fractured memories and sudden, jarring realignments of the past. She thought of her mother, a figure defined by a kind of weary resilience, but also by a sadness that Audra had never fully understood. Had that sorrow been a constant, silent lament for a child given away? Were the stories of her father, the vague tales of a man who was no longer in the picture, merely a convenient fiction to mask a far more complex and painful truth? Every childhood photograph, every whispered family anecdote, every foundational story of her origin was now cast in a new suspicious light. She recalled moments with Cole, fleeting interactions at society events or tense corporate negotiations. Had there been a flicker of something unrecognized? A strange sense of familiarity that she had dismissed as simple charisma, or the vague resemblance one sometimes sees in strangers. And Victoria, formidable, icy, untouchable Victoria Newman. The woman Audra had viewed as a rival, an obstacle to be overcome, a queen on a corporate chessboard she was determined to checkmate. To think that this woman, whose dismissive glances and cutting remarks had fueled Audra's ambition for years, was not a rival but a mother. The very word felt foreign and corrosive on her tongue. The professional jousting, the power plays, the sheer animosity that had characterized their relationship, were they not just business, but a grotesque, unwitting parody of a familial bond? A daughter trying to prove her worth to a mother who saw her only as a threat? This cognitive dissonance was a special kind of agony. It was one thing to learn you were adopted, it was another thing entirely to learn that your biological parents were two people who were central, powerful figures in the world you inhabited, people you had known for years, people with whom you had a history, however adversarial. It made a mockery of her own agency. Every decision she had made, every alliance she had formed, every battle she had chosen to fight against Newman Enterprises or in its defense, now seemed like the moves of a puppet whose strings were being pulled by a hidden hand, the hand of a genetics she never knew she possessed. Had her drive, her relentless pursuit of power and validation, been her own, or was it the Newman legacy manifesting itself in a child who had been denied her birthright? The question gnawed at the core of her self-perception. She had always prided herself on being a self-made woman, on having clawed her way up from obscurity through sheer force of will and intellect. That narrative, the very bedrock of her identity, was now exposed as a potential fallacy. Perhaps she was not a scrappy outsider at all, but a Newman who simply hadn't been let in the door, her entire life a performance of a role written by a fate she was unaware of. The implications began to unfurl in her mind like a poisonous flower, each petal revealing a new layer of complication and potential devastation. Her marriage to Kyle Abbott, a man deeply enmeshed in the rivalries and dynamics of the Newman, Abbott and Chancellor families, now took on a Gothic, almost Shakespearean quality. How would he react? Would he see her as a newfound asset, a Newman heir who could shift the balance of power? Or would he see her as a liability, a complication in his own carefully laid plans and his family's tangled history with the Newmans? And what of the Abbott family itself? Jack Abbott, a man with a decades-long, complex history with both Victor and Victoria, would now be her father-in-law in a completely new context. The family tree was no longer a chart of separate entities. It had become a tangled, incestuous web where business, romance, and now blood were inextricably linked in a way that felt claustrophobic. Her professional standing was equally thrown into chaos. Every deal she had brokered, every position she had taken, could now be reinterpreted through the lens of this newfound heritage. Would her clients and colleagues ever trust her judgment again, or would they always suspect a hidden allegiance to the Newman Empire? Her hard-won respectability was instantly vaporized, replaced by the looming shadow of the Newman name. Then came the more personal, more intimate terror of confronting Cole and Victoria directly. What could she possibly say to them? How does one approach the people who are, in a biological sense, your mother and father, but in every other sense of the word, are virtual strangers and in Victoria's case an outright antagonist? The idea of sitting across from Cole, a man she had judged as weak-willed and perpetually lost, and acknowledging him as her father felt like an insurmountable task. And Victoria? The conversation with Victoria was a prospect that filled her with a unique kind of dread. Would there be remorse? A sudden maternal awakening? Or, more likely given Victoria's character, a cold, pragmatic assessment of the situation, a calculation of the potential damage control required? Audra could already imagine the steely gaze, the clipped tones, the immediate focus on how this affected the Newman family's public image and corporate stability. The possibility of rejection was a very real and terrifying one. To be rejected by a parent you never knew was one thing. To be rejected by a parent you knew all too well, and who had already formed a negative opinion of you, was a uniquely brutal form of psychological torture. The desire for answers. Why was she given up? What were the circumstances? Did they ever think of her? Warred with a furious, burning resentment. They had known. All this time they had moved through the same circles, shared the same air, and they had known, or at least had the capacity to know, and they had said nothing. Their silence felt like a profound negation of her very existence.